Welcome to AI Negotiation Unlocked, the podcast where we explore how artificial intelligence is revolutionizing the way we negotiate. I'm Rosie Bailey, CEO of Nibble, the world's leading AI negotiation platform, and each episode I'll sit down with industry leaders to uncover how businesses can harness AI tools to scale negotiations, boost efficiency, and unlock new revenue opportunities. Now, let's begin. Thank you very much for coming, Dave. I'm absolutely delighted to be here at Vodafone.
Welcome.
We've managed to set up a mini studio in your office. It's been lovely to be here. And welcome to AI Negotiation
Thank
Unlocked.
you.
So shall we start with, a little bit sort of who you are and what you came from. So the job you do here at Vodafone, but also what made you arrive at this place?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Dave Mojarab. I look after our digital product and design team within Vodafone Business. So we're here in Paddington, which is Vodafone Group. I then sit within Vodafone UK and the business part of that team. So within my team, I have a very capable set of product managers, people looking after SEO, CRO, insight analytics, UX design, content, all sorts of great stuff. So when I say I look after it, my team look after a lot of very important journeys for our business customers. And that's everyone from kind of really small businesses up to large multinational corporations and public sector customers as well as a range of our partners who resell Vodafone products. So really varied users across all of our web and app journeys online.
Goodness, we'll come back to that. I bet that makes it complicated, right?
It does. Yeah, the complexity is there every single day, and yeah, definitely something we should return to. My background before this role, a couple of years in Vodafone prior to this role, but in consumer. So still complicated, but much simpler. And then 9 years before that at BT in a variety of different roles from the grad scheme through to kind of product management roles at BT before. So a time, kind of 15 years in which the telecoms industry has changed a huge amount, but I guess never more so than the last couple of years.
So before we get into a bit more detail about telecoms, AI, and negotiations, just as an icebreaker, tell us about a recent negotiation you did, and did it go well or did it not go according to plan?
Okay. So it's interesting because I kind of started thinking about negotiation, thinking about, do I negotiate that much? And I thought, I've just spent a weekend with my two children, one of whom is 3, about to turn 4. All I've done this weekend, apart from run around after them, is negotiate. And the one I was thinking of from yesterday, it didn't go well. Oh. So it was a conversation about my oldest daughter wanting to watch an episode of Bluey, which is a regular request of hers. And I had read a thing. I'm something of an overthinker, and I kind of overthinking every aspect of parenting. I'd read something saying by the age of 3 or 4, they'll probably start to recognize the idea you can have something today or something better tomorrow. So I said, well, you could watch Bluey.
Marshmallow test, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So you can have an episode of Bluey now or 2 tomorrow. The problem is, what I had done is introduce the concept of 2 Blueys being a thing that would be available. And what we ended up with was 2 Blueys there and then. So not a triumphant negotiation, I would say, but reflective of what my weekends look like.
That's so interesting, isn't it? We talk a lot about 2 things. One is ultimatums. And my experience with children is they absolutely do not mind about giving you ultimatums and then rowing back from them indiscriminately, or boxing you into ultimatums that you ultimately wish you'd never made.
Yeah, exactly. And I've thought about all the logical courses of action, the reactions that could follow, and none of those things play out.
None of those things. Yeah, you have to. The extreme, the willingness to go for it, right?
Yeah.
No, it is interesting. But I think the other thing that's interesting about what you said is you'd been thinking about negotiation and thinking it wasn't really something that impacts your life. Whereas actually what we find is once you start evaluating it, these things happen a lot more often than you think. And it's not just buying a car or buying a house.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's a sort of a conversation where you're trying to achieve something, and it might happen in one go or it might happen slowly over a long period of time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we talk about kind of complexity in an organisation like Vodafone and the scale of a company like this as well. It's all negotiation all the time.
Yeah. So let's move on a little bit, because I wanted to talk to you a little bit about AI and AI in the telco industry, and you alluded to the change. So give us some colour of how you think that is fueling change at the moment, and where you think that might lead.
It's so interesting, because I imagine every episode you'll talk about pace of change. And it's interesting looking at it specifically in telecoms, because we're up to about, I think, coming up to 6 years this summer since the kind of commercial launch of 5G. And the interesting thing is that probably in the kind of consumer space, in the way we use our mobile phones day to day, there aren't that many compelling use cases for 5G yet. Now, there are, if you look at things like disaster response, so deploying 5G at the site of an emergency, that kind of thing, and even some of those use cases like, and I'm probably not supposed to mention them here, but there's an EE advert where they're shaving someone via 5G. There's a barber doing it in a shop. Someone's at the top of a mountain. It's all powered by 5G. So there's some amazing potential use cases for 5G, but we're not there in terms of consumer use cases yet. Not like Uber for 4G, that kind of thing. Whereas if you look at the last couple of years with AI, we've had kind of 5 or 6 years of 5G not quite being there in terms of those consumer use cases. And yet with Gen AI, you kind of reflect on the last couple of years and you think, this is extraordinary. It's changing everything we do and it's changing expectations so quickly. We found 5 years ago that business customers became more and more inclined to interact with us online because we'd been heading in that direction anyway, and then suddenly working from home forced them to it. The things that our users now expect of us is changing so much on a daily basis. And the use cases for AI and telecoms range from assisting people online, and so the chatbots that people might picture, but also how to manage an entire mobile network. And we are, assuming all goes to plan, weeks away from the Vodafone 3 merger, having the largest mobile network in the country, and AI will be critical to running that network.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And it's sort of come from nowhere, and it's amazing to see how we've had incredibly smart people running our telecoms networks for years, and they're now being empowered even further with this technology, and it's, yeah, incredibly exciting.
And I suppose then you've got a huge amount of data, haven't you, on how the network needs to be used and so on and so forth, because I do feel like it's that data understanding that then yields the opportunity to use AI, because if you don't know what you're analysing and how you're making decisions, then it's quite hard for the AI to have any substrate to work with, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in terms of our networks, I think there's a huge amount of that data that is available. I think when you start looking at the more kind of direct customer-facing applications, that's probably one of our biggest challenges, making sure we have the right data in really, really complex businesses. So the products we offer can be complicated. The way telcos tend to grow via mergers and acquisitions and not fully integrating those different companies in lots of cases, that adds a layer of complexity as well. And I
suppose it's you don't know what you know at that stage.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no desire to kind of slow down. So no, you're not going to kind of acquire a new company, slow down, fully integrate, move on from there. So there's, I think data telcos is possibly the biggest opportunity and also the biggest challenge.
But it seems to me like an LLM can understand unstructured data. Something as simple as if I wrote an address on an envelope, I wouldn't have to say address line 1, address line 2, postcode. It would extract it quite easily, like a human would read that envelope and identify it as an address. And I suppose if you do have lots and lots of unstructured data, perhaps this new wave of AI is a really good way of utilizing it without having to reorganize it, if that makes sense. Or perhaps it reorganizes it for you.
It's so true. And someone said to me last week, for the first time in history, the format of the data doesn't matter.
And when you think about automating here, do you actually scan what people are doing today and think, how can I automate, assist, speed up? Or do you actually just look at the outcome you're trying to achieve and recreate the way you get there?
I think we do a bit of both, including because one of the things we're looking at the moment is how, when looking at what people are doing, how in processes where those people will continue to be involved and continue to add a lot of value, how can you help them out? How can you take like one part of that process and improve it for them? And we've had some really interesting examples of that. So there's one developed in our team about responding to bid proposals. And because our kind of input data is all over the place, lots of little things you need to go and pick up depending on the questions you're asked, that used to take our teams like months. And what we've looked at is like building a large language model that then allows you to do that in minutes, followed by still some kind of assessment of making sure you're providing the right inputs, tailoring, because I think in those sorts of relationships, tailoring to the people you know will receive that at another organisation, that kind of thing. But we have looked at kind of those existing processes and how to improve them, and that particular use case is already making a really significant difference.
And that brings me back to one of the things you said, that globally here at Vodafone, you're trying to implement AI, and you've done a lot of thinking about the internal, but the customer-facing thinking is more complicated. So do you want to talk a little bit about why that is and how you're tackling that and what you think is the future there for the external-facing use cases?
Yeah. So I think there's probably a couple of things. So I saw a really interesting talk recently about kind of implementation of AI at the Financial Times. So not just a large company, but described as a kind of a company that existed before the internet did. And there were three big questions that they asked of themselves before they kicked off that work. One was, do we want to take an active role or do we want to wait and see? And that's a question I think is becoming less and less relevant. I think the opportunity to wait and see is smaller than ever. There was then, if we're going to, do we want to look at all of our users, or is it just for kind of powering technology? And then the third question was, do we want to drive business value in terms of just internal efficiencies, or looking at driving revenue, looking at the kind of customer experience? And it's interesting because we've tackled similar questions, I think, probably less knowingly. It sounds like at the FT they had these questions up front, they answered them and they moved on from there. And ours has been a bit more, we're kind of finding our feet. The data is definitely a challenge. So we have data across lots of different systems, but it also means the experiences we build are often tied to one of those systems. So we have a challenge of saying, even if we can get the data, where would we surface that for our users in the right way? And there's kind of some foundations we're laying that will help us kind of deal with that problem. And I think there probably is a nervousness as well. So I think if you kind of go to a lot of sort of product management conferences, lots of talks, and whenever anyone's talking about AI, they'll say, well, you will experience hallucinations. I think it's okay as long as they're not brand damaging in a company like Vodafone. So this is kind of just accepting that will happen is quite challenging in a company like Vodafone. But I think the thing that people are becoming more and more aware of is, as I said, it's not just the size of the opportunity, but the fact it's an absolute necessity. And I think we are starting to work on more directly customer-facing use cases. Now, they tend to be, where would a chatbot improve this experience? Yeah. So there's work going on in Group looking at that. The consumer team, the Voxy team in consumer, launched, I think, the first AI chatbot in telco, helping their customers solve their problems. And we're looking at some fairly similar things internally. What we're trying to work out, I think, at the moment is, how far can you kind of take those experiences? So there's, I don't understand my last bill. And then there's actually the idea that your first point of contact when interacting with Vodafone could be this same assistant. And therefore it could be, I'm looking for another product.
And how do you pass off from the I don't understand my bill agent, which is only programmed to do that, to somebody who can go have a holistic view of all the other things, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think in our case, it's like kind of making sure that data is available, making sure we have the inputs available. And that's the great thing is now, as we've said, it's not about having them available in the right formats, but it's having them available at all, which I think is a real challenge for us. Whereas I think in the insight we have so far, there is definitely an appetite amongst our users. I think fundamentally because we're talking about making people's lives easier.
Yes, it's quick, it's straightforward. It answers your question, never has a bad day.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing where if you end up used to these ways of working, we talk about kind of businesses expecting consumer level web experiences. That's how people talked a couple of years ago. What we'll be saying, that the standard now is I can interact in the way I want, and that's not going to be all filtering, searching. I can ask a very simple question and get exactly what I need.
Yeah. No, and that expectation is definitely raised, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that's because the current wave of AI, they released it consumer first, right? So all the tech forward people have all used ChatGPT.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Claude, and they're like, it's out there, it's free. How come that feels basic to them? It feels like
exactly. Yeah, and I think I saw it the weekend. I think for the first time I saw something pop up advertising to be somewhere online. I can't remember the name of the company, but they existed to make sure, essentially, ChatGPT optimization, making sure your company appears high enough up the list of recommendations, those kind of things. And I asked about business telecoms, and Vodafone was suitably high up the list.
Very
so I was
good.
happy. But for smaller companies, you can see how investing in that kind of thing, or even for a team like mine, understanding what ChatGPT is saying about products that we then offer online in language that we might think is perfect for describing our products. But the way ChatGPT deals with the same thing is slightly
breaks it
different.
down.
And there's a kind of clash between the description I saw here and then the one
And you don't have
Vodafone
the
is
control
presenting.
over it.
No,
right?
no, exactly. Which makes me a bit nervous, but is in itself an opportunity.
And you talked a little bit about the challenge of implementing AI, and you talked about the fear of hallucinations. Have you got any hints or tips about how you move past that? I feel like the idea last year was this model hallucinates more than this model, so we need a better model. But it now feels like all the models are getting so good now. You have to move on in your thinking to thinking there will always be a small risk. It's a very small risk. So now how do I make sure I get rid of that risk?
And I think it's interesting because having spent a lot of time, particularly in consumer, where they're receiving kind of thousands of calls every day about sales calls and about I've got a problem with my broadband or I've got a billing concern, you can write the perfect kind of scripts and kind of tips for teams in call centres. But the same is absolutely true in that sometimes the advice given isn't that fantastic. We clearly have kind of different standards, which are quite challenging. I think we're clearly having to spend a lot of time bringing people up to speed on those sorts of principles. And also I think understanding where, like what your threshold would be for saying, actually, this is now problematic, it's happened too many times, or what we're saying is a significant enough challenge to think we need to pause, reflect, and kind of accepting that if you did have to make that kind of change, if you did have to take something down temporarily, that's okay. We're kind of at the stage where we are all learning, but it is challenging because I don't think as large companies were set up to operate at this speed, and certainly not the speed of kind of technological change as we've said. So I think we're definitely kind of working out a way forward in that area, and balancing the right kind of approvals, etc., with the speed at which we need to operate. So I don't think I'm quite yet at kind of tips, but I think I'll probably kind of empathise with other people experiencing that challenge and say, yeah, we're definitely going through the same sorts of things.
I think actually what we're seeing is this huge pace of change at the technology end, right? So at the invention of the technology, and then those people who are fast adopters because they work like that. And then we've got this surprising lag between that and big enterprise, right?
Yeah.
Like big enterprise is not using AI for many customer-facing applications yet. But there'll come a change, it's like an exponential, right? Nothing happens, then boom, like it become a really big change.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I think we maybe even a year off that, maybe a year and a half, but probably not 10 years.
No, and I think the interesting thing when we get to that point is my kind of feeling is that our customers won't want to work with a technology company fundamentally who is lagging behind. And so I think it's important to demonstrate no one's really keeping up, but some kind of not lagging behind, I think, and really embracing the technology and doing what we can, I think, is
perhaps
important.
Celebrating the small wins as well.
Yeah,
you said
exactly.
Your Vox team, and I've seen the publicity around that. That's been celebrated, hasn't it? That
Exactly.
They've been forward thinking on it.
And exactly, and I think the other thing there is that, and several other use cases are about finding the right partners. So the work done at Voxy was kind of built with Accenture, and then there are lots of smaller partners involved elsewhere, kind of getting the right expertise, not expecting everyone internally to know. And I think telecoms is a kind of industry full of experts, and it's slightly alien to us that we're not naturally going to be a business full of AI experts. So we've got really intelligent people who've worked incredibly hard and really well to upskill themselves, but there's still fewer experts in AI than there are in kind of network performance or in how to fix broadband faults or whatever else it might be. So accepting that, embracing even, we're like working with the right partners to deliver the best possible experiences, especially if those partners are able to operate in a kind of more agile, sort of nimble manner. Feels like a really important way to go.
Yes, and takes a bit of kind of connectivity. So I wanted to talk a little bit about negotiation and
Yes.
AI negotiation. And specifically, can I be honest? Like when I try and introduce what Nibble does, I often use so you're trying to renew your broadband contract. You don't have to phone up a call center for 45 minutes. And when I explain that and everyone goes, oh, and I don't have to threaten to leave to get a better deal. I mean, people just love that idea. Do you think that can ever happen?
Yeah, this is really, really interesting because I suspect you might have an agenda, but I also 100% agree. And I think it's interesting if you look at an industry that in terms of kind of consumer telecoms grew out of landlines, and yet kind of online self-service has become kind of the dominant channel relatively quickly, given kind of the background. But there's this sort of nagging doubt in people's minds that you have to call up to get the best deal. And that's because if you look at the last 10 years, you did. So there's absolutely, I think, an opportunity here. And I think it's really important. I think we've seen a shift away from if you don't call up, you definitely won't get the best deal. But I think we can go a step further because I think the nervousness is we don't want to display those cheaper price points online. We don't want them to be readily available to everyone. And it does feel like the kind of negotiation approach could work very effectively because it's what's being done in call centres, but they're working from a relatively small list of promotions available to them, price points available to them.
Because people at the end of the day have to be able to kind of manage it in their heads, right? So I suppose if you give them too much complexity, it's really hard to...
Yeah, exactly. And I think what we've seen is there is also a kind of a slowing down in terms of broadband switching because everything in your home is connected, and therefore having a new router from a new provider and having to change how everything is connected can be quite frustrating. So I think we're at an age now where people maybe want to change provider less than they previously did, but they just want to know they're getting the best possible deal. And I think there's definitely an opportunity for that. I think for consumer in particular, probably I suspect for small businesses. As you then get to our larger business customers, it gets much more complicated in terms of kind of a full account review, that kind of thing. But certainly for consumer and small business, I think there is a big opportunity there. And it's just something that allows those salespeople to focus on more complex challenges. And I suspect more rewarding challenges for them personally.
Exactly, not wanting to be shouted at all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
And do you think there's a difference between the use case in consumer and the use case in business? Now, I totally accept you've got a few very large customers who require an interpersonal experience because it's unique, right? And there's no point automating something that's different every time. But for that smaller business customer, do you think that's very, very similar to the consumer environment, or do you think there are key differences?
I think there are more similarities than ever. I think we were heading in that direction, and then I think the kind of changes in the market, well, almost exactly 5 years ago with the pandemic, I think it accelerated that change. And I think we're just fundamentally at a point where the people operating on behalf of small businesses are consumers the rest of the time, and there's no reason why those experiences should be worse. So I think fundamentally the two are converging. I'm just trying to think if I think there are actually any differences that remain at the small business end.
I think one question I've got is people talk a lot about personalization in e-commerce generally, right, in self-serve solutions. And historically, they've talked about bucketing people into brackets. They don't really personalize one-to-one. They personalize to people a bit like you in whatever framework they're using. And I wonder, and the question I've got is it harder to create those buckets for your business customers because they have more differences than your consumer customers who maybe fit into 3, 5, 10 brackets, whereas actually a business customer that has 100 people and a business customer that has 2 people, you can't bracket them together.
Yeah, I think it is. It's really interesting. I was reflecting on another example at BT actually, I was looking at BT Sport, taking the 4 million customers at that point, and because of the experience we wanted to create online, having to segment that base into a maximum of 50 buckets. 4 million needs to go into 50. And sitting there and doing that manually, then picking, okay, well, those 4 million customers are in 50 buckets. Those 50 buckets get shown 3 things each. These are those 3 things. And this was about 10 years ago, and it worked for a kind of relatively short period of time. And I think the consumer space have done quite well via that kind of personalization based on kind of shared attributes, but not, as you say, not truly personal. I think when you then get into business, it's the size of the business, it's who you're interacting with. So we have it a bit where you could, for example, have a parent trying to renew their child's mobile contract. But there's never really more than kind of average family size of people on any given account. Whereas when you get into the business cases, it's the customers are companies, and then there's lots of very varied users with different levels of kind of permissions, different interests, and it gets really, really complicated really quickly. And then we often talk about kind of the number of employees in a company. But then you could have a small company with like thousands of IoT devices, they're the thing they need to manage, and so they'd be more akin to some of our larger businesses than kind of Soho with a couple of people.
Yeah.
So it's definitely more complicated. And I think there's a danger if you do it badly, it can be worse than no personalization.
Yes.
This is back to a consumer example, but an email yesterday, the classic, hello, anonymous.
Oh, great.
And it's like, just filter that out. Like, and also, the word anonymous made it feel a tiny bit sort of sinister, as well as just being wrong. And so, yeah, it's a challenge for us, and one that I'm kind of determined if we're going to do it, we need to do it well to avoid that kind of reaction.
Fascinating. And so then just to wrap up, just a forward-looking thought. You know, you've been in telco for your career, and you've seen lots and lots of change, and it could be to do with AI or it could be outside AI, but is there one thing that you're quite excited about its potential?
There's probably a couple. I think telecoms has been very reactive in terms of its customer challenges. So I've said a couple of times about broadband faults. There's been some kind of improvements to kind of monitor networks and kind of proactively update customers, but for the most part, that's someone calling up or trying to go on an app or whatever it might be and say, I've got a problem with my broadband. Being able to proactively monitor customers, the performance of their products, the usage of their products, and kind of adjusting the power balance of that relationship that's been very, well, you call us if you've got a problem, and if not, there's a slightly let sleeping dogs lie dimension to that customer relationship.
It's like the gym membership, isn't it? They never tell you you've got a gym membership.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it can sometimes feel like that. So I think there's that. I think there's a real opportunity there to use all of the data that we will now actually be able to use to build much more proactive experiences and make a material impact for our customers. The other one I think is much broader, and to be honest, not something I understand anywhere near as well, but I'm absolutely sure there's an opportunity on where we start on kind of network monitoring to really optimize the way that energy consumption within our networks.
Yes.
It feels like that data is there. There is a need to reduce the amount of energy being used and potentially now a way of dealing with that. So I think there's a couple of kind of one that's closer to the work my team do, and then another broader, wouldn't it be great if we could harness this technology to kind of reduce our carbon footprint? Definitely feels like there's a big opportunity for us there.
Yes, I agree with you. I think information about the grid and the usage, it's gone way beyond the gap in the football game of being a power surge for everyone making a cup of coffee, right?
Yeah.
But yes, I think, and the data will release items that you might not have thought about.
Yeah.
So then just to wrap up, have you got a negotiation tip? Something you think works, something you'd like to share?
This is tricky because kind of touched on not necessarily recognizing the frequency of negotiations. And I think one of the reasons for that is I think I'm probably a reluctant negotiator. The moment you tell me something is a negotiation, I suspect you'd probably notice a physical change. So I think, thinking back to my Bluey example, what I went in and did is basically mess things up for myself immediately. Now, if your starting point is, I don't really like negotiating, and the first thing you do is really ruin your chances of getting the outcome you want, I'm sort of just advising, if you, like me, are a reluctant negotiator, to kind of keeping calm, keeping an eye on the thing you're looking to achieve, and don't mess it up immediately would be my tip.
Don't complain. Well, maybe it's a bit of listening at the start, right? Like, I think that's very good, right? Like assessing the lay of the land before you start.
I think I would be inclined to kind of, to feel like I have to kind of lay out a starting position, especially if no one's talking, especially if there's a silence to be filled and I feel like I have to comment, whereas, stepping back and allowing the other person to speak first, or whatever it is I'm interacting with to speak first would,
Sounds brilliant. And Dave, thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you for having me.
absolutely fantastic and really insightful. If anyone wants to connect with you, is there a way to do that online? Perhaps they could reach out to you on LinkedIn.
Yeah. I think LinkedIn's always the best place. And I find like increasingly like genuinely interesting connections via LinkedIn. Yeah, there's a lot of sales approaches, but there's also people reaching out that seems very, very genuine just to talk about the problems that we're solving.
I totally agree.
And so, yeah, LinkedIn's definitely the place.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
Thanks for listening today to AI Negotiation Unlocked. If you're ready to take the next step in transforming your business operations and scaling your negotiations with AI, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Want to learn more about how Nibble can empower your business? Visit us at nibbletechnology.com or follow us on social media for updates and insights. Stay curious, keep innovating, and we'll see you next time on AI Negotiation Unlocked.